Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are concluding our series on balancing encounters. Today we're talking about epic encounters. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are continuing our conversation about balancing encounters, and today we're talking about encounters that go beyond 20th level. Before we get started, please hit that like and subscribe button in order to give us some growth. And John, why don't we turn it over to you? How do you begin doing the impossible, balancing these epic encounters?
You preface this endeavor to all of your players with, "We'll see what happens." You have to approach this with understanding from the players that this is not supported really officially by 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐞 at all. So unlike previous editions where there was definitely post 20th level or immortal, so you had like immortal rules for first edition, and third edition had its epic level handbooks and things like that. There was epic level support. There's really just not that in 5th edition. The only real support for 5th edition are epic boons that are kind of a throwaway part of the DMG, and it's like every 30,000 experience beyond 355,000 experience, you get an additional boon. And for one, that's a very low margin for the amount of XP to get one of these boons, because some of these monsters that you're fighting are worth just tons of experience, and for it to be enough of a challenge, it's like you're getting a boon every adventuring day. It's kind of crazy. But it's very, very high XP. It's high challenge, and there's really not any class support at this point. So anything that you want to do as a DM is probably going to be homebrew. And we're going to talk, I think, quite a bit about some of those options that you can take on for what it is that you want to do. But generally speaking, like the process is homebrew and play it by ear, and take a lot of the things that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I would say that when it comes to this level, I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the previous video, but have minions ready and utilize them, at large in those battles to really kind of give this sense of a big battle, but also know that monsters are going to absolutely know what they're doing. There's no real mistakes at this level either once you start hitting into these epic pieces. Have your characters earn those experience points.
Yes. So, breaking into this a little bit. So we're talking of it's epic level and counterbalance. We'll talk about that a little bit, but I think about what this video really is going to be is more along the lines of, what do you do at epic levels? If you want to play in epic levels, what are your options? So, option one, easiest option, is you follow what the DMG says and give your players a boon every 30,000 experience. They never gain class levels. They never gain additional hit points or anything else. They basically just stay 20th level and continue to gain boons until you're done playing. Which from a gameplay perspective for me is relatively boring. I feel like there's a real lack of progression there. Some of the boons are okay, but generally speaking, you run out of interesting boons as a player pretty quickly. And if you want to actually have a campaign, like a game that lasts more than just like the wrap-up portion of it, you kind of have to start doing more than that. So option two, and this is the option that I did, I allowed players to start advancing in a separate class. I basically said, okay, at 20th level, you hit your capstone at level 21, you can switch to a new class and begin progressing in whichever class you want. And this was something that you kind of saw quite a bit in 3.5. If you were dealing with like divine creatures or deities, they always had 20 levels in one class, and then 10 or 20 levels in another class. And for the very powerful deities, they may have another 10 to 20 levels in yet a third class. So you would have something like Odin being a 20th level wizard, 20th level fighter, 20th level cleric, and that was kind of what he was in terms of his epic level. And that's how they balanced it to some degree. And so that's kind of the approach that I took whenever we ran this. Sorry, I'm just giving you an opportunity to talk.
No, I'm just listening to it. It's like, yep. I remember those days of fighting, in 3.5 and building the additional classes, and it was a lot of fun. But it's much the same as what we were talking about in the previous video. Then your laundry list of all of your abilities and all the things that you can do becomes so much larger, and so it then again becomes the work of the GM to understand what all of their characters can do in order to actually make those experiences around the table worthwhile. Which,
from a GM perspective, it can be very overwhelming. We ran the Cast Down from Haven campaign. I think it's been maybe 2 years by now, but for that campaign, everybody in the group was, by the time we finished the campaign, I believe everybody had, they had 20 levels in one class and about 15 levels in their second class. So we almost hit level 40 running through this. And basically what I did is I allowed boons to be a part of this, but I actually created my own chart so that you guys could reach godhood, which is very typical in the D&D sense. Like that's what 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 was. That's what the I in 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 stood for, was immortals, and there was kind of that pursuit of becoming a deity. In that book, you were trying to convince a god to sponsor you in order for you to be able to become a deity, and that was kind of the pursuit of that process. And for our particular game, there were no gods, and you guys were filling those roles by defeating other deific creatures. But there was a progression where you went through from a quasi-deity to a demigod to a lesser deity to a deity, and that was a progression you took, and you were able to get boons, and I took those out of the DMG. I also took abilities, and these were mostly taken out of like the 3.5 abilities that deities had, and then there were also blessings, and there are blessings in the DMG for 5th edition as well. They're just kind of more limited. So all of these are ones that I expanded the lists on so that there were more options for everybody who wanted to use those. And then as you progressed, you basically just gained more and more power. I allowed the progression for experience to continue in the way that it kind of did in 5th edition. So each progressive level took an additional 5,000 experience points. So it was 55,060, 65,070, and it just added up. By the time you guys were done, you almost had 2 million experience points each. And then beyond those things, I also started getting into like epic weapons. So there were +4 weapons, +5 weapons, the kind of stuff that again you would see in older editions, but really is not existent in 5th edition at all.
Yeah, which you did a remarkable job in balancing that. That is a skill that I know that I do not have, and probably not one that I even want to build in playing at that level and doing all those types of things that you did. But it was very enjoyable from a player standpoint in coming into it. It actually reminded me a lot of when we used to play in the 3.5 edition and kind of going against the gods. Like we would go on full campaigns of just like taking out all the gods across the different planes, and
because why not? Battle, it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Which is what you do at those levels, and it's absolutely enjoyable. I will say that in playing in 5th edition versus 3.5, it almost felt like, even with the great job you did in balancing it, it felt like I was playing Whose Line Is It Anyway? Like, no matter what boon I chose or how I progressed, I was going to be more powerful, and it was more flavor than anything, because even without the boons, I was so powerful that it was nearly impossible for the gods themselves to defeat us. Now, there were some fights that got really close, and we talked about this in our previous video, because there's a tactical play that somebody makes that just completely flips the tables, and then you're playing catch-up trying to get the upper hand in the battle again. But for the most part, a lot of those additional things that you're getting post-20 are flavorful, and you're so powerful. No matter what you choose, you're just increasing your variability and power by that much percentage at every turn, and it doesn't necessarily matter which one you pick.
So I do think it's important, because this is not a perfect science, and I don't want to present this as like I am the be all and end all when it comes to balancing encounters for Epic, because it is an impossible task to undertake. And for full disclosure, most of the fights that they engaged in, they either completely destroyed the enemies that they were trying to fight, or it was a struggle and they barely pulled out by the skin of their teeth. And the culmination of the entire campaign was them getting defeated by the beholder goddess known as the Mother. So, like that...
Because one of our party members betrayed us.
Yes. Yes. But you guys did lose. So it was a situation where, the epic level, it's a roller coaster of emotions in every single fight. They're long battles. This is something we talked about in the tier 4, where everything takes 4 or 5 times as long to resolve an individual player's turn. The same thing happens for most of the enemies, but you're also having to double down on the number of enemies that the party is facing because they have become so powerful. They are, for all intents and purposes, deific. They have so many abilities and so many powers that you have to really lay it on thick if you want them to feel like they're being challenged at all. And to some degree, I was not successful at that in every instance in which I wanted to be.
Well, I was going to say also, and this is from the player standpoint at that level, like I would have to spend 45 minutes before every game just going through my character sheet and remembering what I could do. And not even knowing exactly what we'd be facing, but just to refamiliarize myself with what my character's abilities were. And we played every week.
Yes.
Like there was so much on the paper that I would have to go through it. So the amount of time as a GM and putting in the actual battle and the confrontations and the story prior to that every week, I imagine, is pretty significant.
Yeah, it took an entire week every week, and I would have to custom build pretty much everything that you guys faced off against. Now, I do want to point out a resource that I made ample use of, but even that was something that I modified heavily and did not use verbatim the way that it was put together, and it's from Dave 2008. So this is a guy, you can find him on Ian World, you can find him on Reddit, but for a long time he was putting together epic resources for epic level play. He has great resources when it comes to the monsters and those types of things. I don't think that he really finished very much with the player stuff, which is why I custom built most of the player stuff myself. To my knowledge, the project is not being pursued anymore, but it's a great place to start if you're looking at doing epic level challenges. Just finding monsters or finding bosses or other ideas for things that you can do that are converted over into 5th edition, especially from previous editions, like taking the gods and goddesses that were all statted out for something like 3.5 and finding 5th edition versions of these. And I'll link this down below so that everybody can find this and use that information. But it's a great place to start. You just need to keep in mind that it's also balanced for the player rules that he was intending to put in. So I actually took much of this stuff and I actually dialed it back quite a bit because I wanted to make sure that it was challenging for the specific power level that I was using for my players at the time.
Now, I'm sure that you have other things you want to add in here, John, but this is probably something I want to point out, but it might also be differing in how some folks may be thinking about this. And we mentioned this in one of our previous videos. I think it might have been in our Evil Campaign series and looking at different tier play. But for myself, when I start getting above 20th level, I like to think that the game starts to shift and change away from like the epic heroes going on epic quests and fighting epic monsters and start looking more at like strongholds and changing like the whole tactical play of the game, where those individual abilities start to become less important and you start looking at like armies battling and fighting and moving the campaign in that direction, which I personally really enjoy. And I understand that we're not talking about that specifically here, but it's also recognizing that you may be able to shift how your game is played once you get into epic levels, and now there's heroes that are seeking you out to attack your stronghold, and you have armies and land that you're protecting, and you're changing the actual mechanics and the course of gameplay once you get above level 20, if you don't want to go this epic route with individual, parties going and fighting gods on different planes of existence.
Yeah, and this is something that at this level, so I think the strongholds is really tier 3, tier 4, right? And
right.
when you get into tier 5, we'll call it epic level, you're starting to get into a place where it's like the mortal coil is no longer as important as it was. So you might have a stronghold that's there. You might feel called to go and defend it with those who are loyal to you. But at this stage, you're also looking at things like you're having your own demi-plane or your own plane of existence, especially if you're pursuing this deific route, which we were playing on kind of an escalated scale. So we didn't get into the stronghold building aspect when we ran through this. But you guys did fight other deific creatures on their own personal planes of existence. And it's something that I always, we've talked about this a bunch. Baldur's Gate 2 was very influential in the way that we approached a lot of our early gaming, because it just came out around the time that we started really getting into Dungeons and Dragons and pursued those types of things. So you kind of have that storyline of somebody seeking out their godhood, or maybe rejecting it or whatever. And I think that sometimes this is where we get those personal quest lines maybe involved for many characters. So you're talking about the broader scope. That is definitely there, but it's also the personal pursuits. What do you want your legacy as a player to be, or as a character to be? And I think that can be very engaging. And for myself, I always think about the sequel for Shadows of Am, which was Throne of Ball, where you have your own demi-plane, and you're getting over challenges, and then you're eventually fighting the ultimate boss at the end of that game in order to try and defeat them and either destroy the Throne of Ball or take the Throne of Ball for yourself.
Yeah, really well said, and I agree. That's probably a big piece of the influential part. I just want to make sure that we threw that out there too, because gameplay at this level and balancing encounters may not always be that party going against an individual or a god or something. It could definitely look different if you wanted to structure your campaign that way.
Well, and I think that it also operates as a palate cleanser, because sometimes if you're wanting to run something like this, you want to run it over a longer period. You've played a character for 20 levels, and you're like, man, I don't want to give up on this character. Let's do 20 plus. And so you start getting into epic levels, and so then players are really exploring the character on a different level. And for those types of interactions, I feel like it's kind of changing the tone of the campaign. You want to have those opportunities to retreat to your stronghold, to retreat to your demi-plane, and not just do like what we were talking about, where it's encounter after encounter after encounter, which is draining. It takes so much time and effort to review your abilities, and having a week or 2 weeks that you're doing more social encounters or more encounters that are not so combat heavy are very beneficial at epic levels because of how challenging they can be.
Yeah, those battles last 4 hours, guys.
Yeah.
Like, 4 hours you're sitting down and just fighting through one fight.
It's like, we got to get started immediately because we want to be able to get done on time, and that's all it is. Every single battle was between 3 and 4 hours long, and some of them were longer.
Well, I apologize for derailing a little bit. What else did you want to add in here about balancing things at this level?
I think really, for the most part, it is, like I said, it's GM choice, it's player choice, it's a group choice for how you want to approach this. I granted the characters a huge number of abilities. I think that the big thing here is that you should probably increase the capstone for ability scores beyond 20. So the easy way of doing that is basically saying maybe they get an additional, like the capstone for ability scores increases by 1 per level after level 20. Because, the capstone normally is 20 for 5th edition, except for the barbarian that can hit 24. And then for 20th level and beyond, it's like, okay, so when you hit level 21, you can move a score up to 21. When you hit level 22, you can move scores up to 22. Not necessarily saying that they add those every single level, but like those are where the new limits are for character classes. I think that makes a lot of sense because you're reaching into this beyond mortal type situation. And that is probably the one thing that I think really is kind of missing from the epic levels in the DMG, if you're wanting to stick closer to the DMG version, is that there should be new caps for where ability scores are allowed to go at a certain point to make it feel like you are in a different tier of play.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. I don't know that I have anything else to add on this specifically. I agree that it's going to be a lot up to the folks around your table on how you want to proceed.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all I have for now. I know I kind of talked about all of the stuff kind of broadly about the things that I've done. If people are interested in me getting in more depth in that, then I'm more than happy to, give some of the resources that I was using or go into more detail about the resources that I used for the epic level play that we did. But in the meantime, for anybody who's wanting to support the channel, like, subscribe, notification bell, always leave a comment because that really helps the video and the channel to be seen a little bit more and helps us to to create more content and gives us more support. So until the next time, we'll see you, and we'll get started on our next series.
Dungeon Brew.